Hello everyone. Today in this video we will be covering creating Docker images for the .NET application. So in our previous videos we did cover how you can install Docker on your Windows machine using Ubuntu distro. You don't need Docker desktop for the same. So we will be continuing forward and we'll be creating a Docker image for the same. Also I'll be covering how we need to use NuGet config, how we can pass parameters into the NuGet config for the artifactory password for any private artifactory from which you might want to restore packages from. And I will also briefly cover these steps for the Azure DevOps pipeline for creating the images and parameterizing, as in adding the variables or parameters into the pipeline. So let's get started. So this is my .NET application. I will not go into details of the application, but I'll cover the topic here, as in the important files here is the NuGet config file and a Docker file here. So this Dockerfile. So before we get into that, let's talk about Dockerfile first. So in this case, I am using .NET SDK as the base image, and then I also need one of the tool to be installed. So I'm adding a step for installing the tool and then setting the environment path within the Dockerfile. Now I've commented this step, and this is for taking a build argument, artifactory password. For this demo, I have my password hard coded in the NuGet config. However, this is not a good practice. You must take an argument into the Docker file, and then you can possibly replace the argument into the NuGet config. So in this next step, I'm copying all the files from the current directory into the Docker image file, as in the folder which will be used. Then I'm replacing the artifactory password parameter. So this is a sample NuGet param config file, NuGet config file. Usually the naming convention is this. Now coming to this package sources, I have two package sources here. One is NuGet and one is some private artifactory, say jfrog artifactory, nexus, or anything else, or Docker Hub possibly. Now in this case, because I am mostly working around JFrog, I also need to give the API keys here. So I'm again giving the URL, and then here, if you can see, I am adding the value. I can give the password value directly here, which I have done in this file. But for the privacy purposes, I am also covering this part wherein you can pass it as a parameter. You also add in the package source credentials section, the artifactory section, the username with which it should log into the artifactory portal, and I'm also giving the clear text password here. So these two values are same. That is the API in case of JFrog artifactory. Now, because I am using this parameter into the NuGet config file into the Docker file, when I copy the files, I need to pass it the password. So I take it via argument, and then I replace this artifactory password in NuGet config with this argument, which is being passed to the Docker file. Then we have other steps when we restore the .NET application, and I give the configuration file to be used as NuGet config, in which we replaced the password, and again we have build steps, publish steps, and all. So um, so let's get back to running the image first. So before I get into that, we have to my application is into the C drive right now, right? And it's into the Windows machine, and the image which we are going to create is going to be into the uh, Ubuntu distro, right? So what do we need? We need to first create a directory into the Ubuntu machine. Then we will be mapping our C drive, or whichever folder your project is in. We will be mounting that drive with the directory we created. Later on, when we navigate into the directory and then into our project folder, we can further do or run our steps for building the Docker image. All right, so I have renamed the folder here because that folder was already existing on my machine. So let's get back into running the steps for creating the image. Before we get into that, if you can see, I have two windows open. So here I'm running the Docker file. In the previous video, I did cover that how you can simply run sudo docker and your Docker will be running. And in the different window, you can do your steps of creating an image. So let's make a directory first. All right, so we are going to make the directory here, give the password. It is asking for the machine password of Ubuntu. Next, you mount the C drive with the directory we created. Oh, sorry, I have a space here. So, okay. Hmm. So it has now mounted the C drive onto this project. Now in everything in C drive will be available in this folder, and I will be, because my project is in C drive repository and then test API folder. So I'll be, first of all, I'll do cd into that directory. The directory is repository and test API, and for the this part is the where we have mounted our C drive. So let's cd into it. Now we are into the project directory. Next step is to build the Docker image. So because this project is being copied, so my all the files of this API are now copied there, and I have a Docker file available there. So it is not going to talk to this Docker file. So for building a Docker image, all you need to do is run docker build. Hyphen T is for tag. I'm tagging my API with the latest tag, and dot is for the current directory, all the files in the current directory. No cache is something we are telling the Docker while building the image that it should not use any cached resources, or when it is doing the .NET restore, it shouldn't be using the cached packages. So we'll be using this command in our case because I have artifactory password hard coded into the NuGet config file. But the case which I showed you, wherein we were giving the parameter into this, in that case we will have to use this command, wherein I'm giving a build argument and a artifactory password. This value, this name is same as the argument which we are taking into the Docker file. And then I'm giving the password of the artifactory, whichever private artifactory you might be having. You can also pass the artifactory username as well. So for each argument into the Docker file, you have to give build arg artifactory password. Then again, build arg artifactory username is equal to this, and this way you can add more build arguments into this command. And again, we can add no cache in the end, and T is for tagging again. So I'll be using this command in our case, but you can making sure that you know that for passing the password, this is the command you have to use. Let's move ahead and build our image. Okay, so it is going to build the image for us. Oh, so I had to cancel my build again because I was behind the proxy. I've turned it off, and I'll run the command again to build the Docker image. The proxy, if you're behind the proxy, it might not be able to connect to the server, so I had to turn it off. After this is done, we will be running our image. So my .NET API is configured in the launch setting JSONs a file to be running on the 5000 port. So I'm letting it know that I want to run my Docker image, whose name is test API, and I want to forward its port from 5000 to 8080. And I'm also giving this parameter to let it know that this is ASP.NET Core URLs and which belong to this category. So this parameter was important to give, but if possibly you can do some settings around your project to avoid this, but let's keep it simple for now. So my image is created, and it's the test API image latest. But before I run the image, you can also see the list of images you have. So run sudo docker images, and if you can see, I have test API latest image here, and I have other images as well. Okay, and I now what I need to do is run this image. So let's run. Okay, let's copy this command again to run the docker image. So it has started my .NET application. It's a .NET 6 application, and it's a Lambda API. So if I go, okay, so I was already having it running, but let's start it again. So this is my test API, and it's working fine. Now, now we have more to it. You have built your image on the local, you have tested your image on the local. Now what next? You will be deploying it. You will be pushing all those changes into the repository, and then you might want to run it into the pipeline, and you might want to pass the artifactory password there without it being reflected into the pipeline logs. So we don't want our password to be reflected in clear text into the pipeline log. So you have to do certain steps into the Azure DevOps pipeline. So I'll be covering that next. All right. So we did cover the NuGet config, how we can give the configuration and password parameterization. We covered the Docker file as well. We covered the steps to run the image onto the local. Next is, because we need to give the password into the Azure DevOps. So what do we need to do? We need to create a variable group and give a parameter or variable name actually for the password. So go to your Azure DevOps portal, go to the pipelines icon, and into that scroll down to library section. Once you reach there, you will be opened up with this window wherein you need to click on plus variable group. This will create a variable group for you. I have named the variable group as test variable group, and into this, in the variables, I have added artifactory password there. You need to lock it so that it knows that this is a secret. I don't want the other users to be able to see it, so I have logged it, and then it is showing it as in stars. Next, into your pipeline, in the variables section, you need to add the group which is to be used in the pipeline, this test variable group, and under this, as key value pair, I will be giving the key as art password for this pipeline, and the value is the variable which I have declared in the group. Next, you might also need, because you are connecting to some private Docker repository or hub, Docker hub, or any artifactory. So what you need to do, you need to add a service connection as well. So go to Azure, again into the Azure DevOps portal, and the below there is a settings icon, and if you click on that, you will reach this window wherein in the project settings you have to scroll down to pipeline section, and in that you click on the service connections, and then it will let you create a service connection. You have to choose the Docker type. So in my case, it was already created. The name is your Docker artifactory. Next step that you need to add into the pipeline is Docker login. You need to log into the Docker hub or container registry. My case is this container registry, which is connected to the jfrog artifactory. Next, we build an image. Again, we give the container registry. We give the path to the Docker file. The command is build. Earlier, the command was login. I'm also giving the folder of the repository. You can give any tag. And then in the arguments, please ignore this is two times, but this has to be one time because I'm only passing one build argument, artifactory password. In case you had artifactory username as well, so you will again add build argument, and artifactory username is equal to this username, similar to that. So in this case, we had only one. Then the next step is going to be push into the artifactory. Again, you have to give the container registry it should connect to. You give the command, you give the repository path, and the tag with which, like in our case on the local, uh, pushed it, we created the image using the latest tag. You can add any tag you want. And this is how the entire pipeline may look like. So my pool is simple Azure pipelines pool with Ubuntu latest machine. I have some trigger branches. I have a variable group there. And this step, if you have seen my Git tagging video, this step is needed to persist credentials so that we can do Git tagging into the branch. But this was not part of this video, but we have a video considering this. Then we have docker login, docker build, docker push commands, and then we are doing the git tag as well. So that's it. This is how your pipeline is going to look like, and this is how you can create a Docker image for your .NET application. I did struggle with passing the password earlier, but then I had to include NuGet.config into the repository, and then I had to replace the password into the Docker file. Yeah, that's it. I hope that helped. Feel free to add any questions, any requests you might have into the comment section below. We'll be happy to reach out to you. Thank you. Bye bye.